October 1944. The eastern reaches of Poland lay wrapped in morning mist as Anna Kowalska walked through frost-covered fields that had belonged to her family for 3 generations. At 23 years old, she had watched those same fields transform from abundant wheat harvests into a treacherous no-man's land, separating 2 armies. The simple scarecrow she had constructed the previous evening stood motionless near the tree line, its arms outstretched in a pose that seemed almost welcoming. She had no idea that within 72 hours, this humble figure would become the catalyst for one of the most unusual tactical victories in the Eastern European theater. Anna believed she was merely protecting what little remained of her family's autumn potato crop. She would soon discover that desperation and rural ingenuity could accomplish what entire battalions sometimes could not. Before we dive into this story, make sure to subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. What began as a farm girl's simple attempt to salvage her harvest would spiral into a chain of events that military historians would debate for decades, raising profound questions about the nature of deception, the fog of conflict, and how the smallest acts of civilian resistance could reshape the tactical landscape. Anna had returned to the family farm 6 months earlier, after her mother fell ill and her 2 brothers disappeared into the chaos of the advancing front lines. The farm sat in a peculiar position, roughly 8 kilometers west of what had been the German defensive positions and 12 kilometers east of the approaching forces. Intelligence officers on both sides had marked the area as abandoned civilian territory, a buffer zone too dangerous for occupation, yet too insignificant for major operations. But Anna refused to abandon the land. Her father had died there. Her grandfather was buried beneath the old oak tree near the northern property line. Every furrow in those fields represented generations of labor, sacrifice, and stubborn Polish determination. When officers from the German forces had passed through 3 weeks earlier, commandeering what little livestock remained, their lieutenant had warned her in broken Polish that she had perhaps 2 weeks before the area became active. He advised evacuation. She had nodded politely, then returned to her daily routines the moment they departed. The Scarecrow incident began innocuously enough. Hannah had noticed that despite the deteriorating security situation, local wildlife had grown bold, raiding what remained of the root vegetables she had managed to plant that spring. Deer, wild boar, and even rabbits had discovered that human presence in the area had diminished significantly. For 3 consecutive nights, something had been digging up her potato rows, destroying weeks of careful cultivation. On October 17th, she constructed the Scarecrow using materials at hand: an old coat that had belonged to her father, a wide-brimmed hat, some straw from the barn, and a wooden frame she assembled from broken fence posts. She positioned it near the eastern edge of the potato field, facing toward the tree line where she suspected the animals were emerging. The figure stood approximately 1.8 meters tall, its arms spread wide, its posture almost cheerful despite the grim surroundings. What Anna did not know was that German military engineers had seeded the area with mines 2 months earlier, during their strategic withdrawal from advanced positions. The minefield extended in an irregular pattern across approximately 15 hectares, including portions of her eastern fields. The engineers had worked quickly, under pressure, and their documentation of the minefield's exact boundaries was imprecise at best. They had posted warning signs in German along the main road, but those signs had long since been removed or destroyed. Anna also remained unaware that a reconnaissance unit from the German forces, approximately 50 personnel strong, had received orders to conduct a probing operation through the area. Their objective was to assess civilian presence, evaluate road conditions, and gather intelligence on the positioning of opposing forces. The unit consisted of experienced soldiers, veterans of multiple campaigns, led by an Oberleutnant named Friedrich Hartmann, who had earned commendations for tactical competence during operations in France and the Low Countries. On the morning of October 19th, Hartmann's unit approached Anna's farm from the northwest. They had been moving for 14 hours, conducting a wide circular reconnaissance that would eventually bring them back to their main defensive positions. The men were tired, alert, but not particularly anxious. Intelligence reports suggested minimal hostile activity in the sector. They expected an uneventful completion to their patrol. As they neared the property, the point man spotted the Scarecrow through his field glasses. He immediately signaled a halt. Hartman moved forward to assess the situation, studying the figure through his own optics. The Scarecrow stood motionless in the pale morning light, its arms outstretched, positioned near a cluster of trees that could easily conceal enemy positions. What happened next would be reconstructed through multiple accounts: Hartman's own report, testimony from surviving unit members, and Anna's detailed recounting to Polish resistance coordinators who interviewed her weeks later. Hartman interpreted the Scarecrow as a potential indicator of human presence, possibly even a deliberately positioned marker. The figure's placement seemed too strategic, too well positioned near the tree line. In his experience, civilians who remained in contested areas often tried to signal their presence to military forces, hoping for protection or simply acknowledgement. The Scarecrow, visible from considerable distance, could serve that purpose. Alternatively, it might be camouflage for an observation post, a crude but effective method of concealment he had seen employed by irregular forces in other theaters. He ordered his unit to take defensive positions while he formulated an approach strategy. The soldiers deployed along a low rise approximately 300 meters from the Scarecrow, establishing a perimeter with clear sight lines. Hartman studied the terrain carefully. The fields appeared open, the ground firm enough for movement. He could see no obvious threats, no signs of prepared positions or fortifications. After 15 minutes of observation, Hartman made his decision. Rather than bypass the area entirely or call for artillery reconnaissance, he would send a patrol forward to investigate. His reasoning followed standard tactical doctrine: determine whether the farm represented a threat, assess civilian presence, and secure the area if possible. The operation seemed straightforward, low risk given the intelligence picture. He selected a squad of 10 personnel for the initial approach, experienced soldiers who had worked together for months. Their orders were clear: advance to the Scarecrow, assess the situation, signal back their findings. If they encountered resistance, they would withdraw immediately. If they found nothing threatening, the remainder of the unit would follow. Sergeant Klaus Weber led the advance element. At 31 years old, Weber was among the oldest soldiers in the unit, a veteran who had survived campaigns in multiple countries. He approached such tasks with methodical caution, never rushing, always reading the terrain. His squad advanced in staggered formation, weapons ready, eyes scanning for threats. They covered the first 100 meters without incident. The morning remained quiet, only the sound of boots on frost-hardened earth and the distant calling of crows. Weber paused twice, signaling his men to freeze while he studied the path ahead. Everything appeared normal. The Scarecrow stood motionless exactly as they had first observed it. No movement from the tree line, no sound suggesting human presence. At approximately 150 meters from the Scarecrow, Weber stepped on the first mine. The explosion occurred at 9:47 in the morning. The blast threw Weber backward, the force of the detonation audible across the entire area. 2 soldiers nearest to him were caught in the fragmentation radius. The squad immediately went prone, following their training, but that instinctive response triggered 2 additional mines. Within seconds, 4 men were casualties, and the squad found itself frozen in place, terrified to move in any direction. From his position on the rise, Hartman watched in horror as his men's simple reconnaissance operation transformed into catastrophe. He immediately recognized what had happened. They had entered a minefield, and his soldiers were now trapped in a kill zone with no clear safe path forward or backward. His next decisions, made under extreme pressure, would compound the disaster. Following doctrine that emphasized rapid casualty evacuation, Hartman ordered a rescue operation. He believed his men had simply been unlucky, that they had triggered isolated mines rather than entering an extensive minefield. He selected another team, ordering them to advance along a slightly different route to reach the trapped squad. The second team managed to advance 70 meters before triggering 3 mines in rapid succession. Within minutes, Hartman had gone from commanding a routine reconnaissance patrol to presiding over a tactical nightmare. 12 men were now casualties, others were trapped and immobile, and he still had no clear understanding of the minefield's extent or pattern. Discipline began to fracture. Several soldiers, seeing their comrades in distress, attempted independent rescue efforts without orders. Each movement risked additional detonations. Hartman shouted commands trying to establish control, but the situation had devolved beyond simple command structure. Fear, confusion, and the powerful human impulse to help wounded comrades overrode tactical training. Over the next 40 minutes, the scene deteriorated into chaos. Additional mines detonated as soldiers attempted various rescue approaches. Some men froze in place, too terrified to move. Others crawled forward desperately, trying to reach wounded comrades. Hartman, recognizing that continued action would only increase casualties, finally ordered a complete halt to all movement. His remaining effective personnel, now reduced to approximately 26 soldiers, established positions and ceased all rescue attempts until they could properly assess the situation. Anna heard the first explosion from inside her farmhouse, where she had been attempting to repair a damaged butter churner. The sound was distinctive, unmistakable even to someone with limited military experience. She had heard similar detonations before, during the German withdrawal 2 months earlier. She understood immediately what was happening. Her first instinct was to hide, to retreat to the root cellar and wait for the situation to resolve itself. But as additional explosions echoed across her fields, she felt an unexpected surge of conflicting emotions. These were soldiers who represented an occupying force, men whose armies had devastated her country and destroyed countless lives. Yet they were also human beings, suffering and dying on her family's land because of decisions made far above their individual authority. She moved to an upper window and observed the scene through a gap in the shutters. She could see soldiers scattered across her eastern field, some motionless, others clearly in distress. She could see the Scarecrow, still standing peacefully, its presence now seeming almost mocking given the carnage surrounding it. She could see the remaining German forces holding position on the rise, their organization visibly strained. For 20 minutes, Anna wrestled with a decision that would define her for the rest of her life. Every instinct of survival urged her to remain hidden, to let events unfold without her intervention. These men represented armies that had shown little mercy to Polish civilians. Why should she risk anything to help them? But another voice argued differently. These were human beings, many of them likely conscripts with as little choice in their circumstances as she had in hers. They were suffering because of mines that threatened her own safety as well. And perhaps most significantly, she alone possessed knowledge that might prevent additional casualties. She knew the safe paths through her own property, routes she had used for months without incident, areas that had definitely not been mined. At 10:37, Anna Kowalska made a decision that would seem incomprehensible to many who later learned of it. She emerged from her farmhouse carrying a white cloth tied to a long stick, walking slowly toward the German positions with her improvised flag of truce held high above her head. Hartman spotted her immediately. His first assumption was that she might be an enemy combatant, attempting some form of ruse. He ordered his men to aim their weapons but hold fire, waiting to see her intentions. As she drew closer, he could clearly identify her as a young woman, dressed in civilian farm clothing, her posture non-threatening, her pace deliberate and careful. She stopped approximately 30 meters from the German position and called out in Polish, then attempted simple German phrases she had learned during the occupation. She pointed to the minefield, then to herself, then gestured toward the farmhouse. Her meaning gradually became clear. She knew the area. She knew safe routes. She was offering to help. Hartman faced an extraordinary decision. Accepting help from a civilian, particularly one who might be affiliated with resistance forces, violated numerous protocols. He had no way to verify her intentions or knowledge. She could easily be leading his men into an ambush or deeper into the minefield. Yet he also recognized that without intervention, his trapped soldiers faced either slow death from injuries or additional casualties from any rescue attempt his own forces might undertake. He called forward his most experienced NCO, a Feldwebel named Otto Richter, who had learned passable Polish during the occupation. Through Richter, Hartman conducted a brief but intense negotiation with Anna. He questioned her about the minefield, about her knowledge of the area, about her motivations. Her answers were direct and practical. She explained about the mines, about her months living alone on the property, about the routes she knew were safe. When Hartman asked why she would help enemy soldiers, her response was simple and devastating. Because they are suffering and I know how to stop it. Hartman made his decision. He would allow Anna to guide a small recovery team along her indicated safe route. If she led them into danger, he would consider her actions hostile and respond accordingly. If she proved truthful, he would ensure her safety and provide compensation. The negotiation took less than 10 minutes. Both parties understood the stakes and neither had time for extended deliberation. Anna led the first rescue team herself, walking ahead of 4 German soldiers who followed her path exactly, stepping where she stepped, matching her route precisely. She moved with quiet confidence, her knowledge of her own land evident in every decision. She led them not in a straight line toward the trapped soldiers, but in a winding route that followed the western boundary of the field, then curved gradually eastward along a path she had used countless times to access the tree line for firewood. The route worked. The team reached the nearest trapped soldiers without incident, administered immediate aid, and began the careful process of extracting casualties back along Anna's designated path. Over the next 3 hours, she guided 7 separate rescue operations, each time walking the route herself first, demonstrating its safety, then allowing German soldiers to follow her precise footsteps. By early afternoon, all surviving soldiers had been recovered from the minefield. The final casualty count was devastating. 14 soldiers had been killed by mine detonations, another 8 had sustained serious injuries requiring immediate evacuation, and 6 more had moderate wounds that would remove them from active duty for weeks. Of Hartman's original 50-man reconnaissance unit, only 22 remained combat effective. The Scarecrow stood throughout the entire operation, its arms still outstretched, its cheerful posture unchanged. None of the German soldiers approached it. The figure had become, in their minds, a marker of tragedy, a symbol of how thoroughly their simple patrol had collapsed into disaster. Hartman, to his credit, honored his agreement with Anna. He provided her with medical supplies from his unit's stores, official documentation declaring her property under military protection, and a substantial quantity of preserved food rations. More significantly, he ordered his remaining men to mark the safe route Anna had identified, posting clear warnings about the minefield and ensuring that future German forces would know the danger. Before his unit departed, Hartman spoke with Anna through Richter's translation. He thanked her formally, acknowledging that her actions had prevented additional casualties. He asked her again why she had helped them, seeking to understand the motivations behind such an inexplicable choice. Anna's response, as recorded in Hartman's subsequent report, reflected a perspective that transcended simple loyalty or enmity. I did not save German soldiers. I saved human beings who were suffering on my family's land. There is a difference. The incident's aftermath rippled through multiple levels of military command. Hartman faced an investigation into his tactical decisions, though he was ultimately cleared of serious misconduct. His superiors concluded that he had operated with reasonable caution given the intelligence available, and that the minefield's existence in that location was an intelligence failure rather than a command error. However, the loss of 28 casualties during what should have been a routine reconnaissance operation marked his record permanently. For the German military engineers who had originally laid the mines, the incident prompted a comprehensive review of documentation procedures. Investigators discovered that the engineering unit had been under significant pressure during their withdrawal, that they had worked quickly across multiple locations, and that their records of mine placement were incomplete and sometimes inaccurate. The investigation led to stricter protocols for minefield documentation, though by late 1944, such improvements came too late to prevent numerous similar incidents. Anna's role became known to local resistance networks within weeks. Coordinators initially viewed her actions with suspicion, questioning whether she had collaborated with the occupying forces. Her detailed explanation, corroborated by witnesses who had observed the incident from concealed positions in the surrounding forest, eventually satisfied their concerns. The resistance leaders concluded that her actions, while unconventional, had not compromised Polish interests and might even have provided tactical intelligence about German unit movements and casualties. The Scarecrow remained in place for another 6 weeks, until advancing forces finally reached the area in early December. By then it had become a landmark of sorts, a marker that soldiers on both sides referenced when discussing the local terrain. Some who knew the full story saw it as a symbol of civilian resilience and unexpected mercy. Others viewed it as a reminder of how unpredictable circumstances could transform any situation into catastrophe. Anna continued living on the farm through the winter, though she eventually accepted evacuation in January 1945 as the front lines shifted dramatically. She survived the conflict, married a teacher from a neighboring village in 1947, and lived until 1993. In interviews conducted during the 1980s, she reflected on the incident with a mixture of satisfaction and continuing uncertainty. She never regretted her decision to help the trapped soldiers, but she also never fully resolved the moral complexity of having aided forces that represented occupation and oppression. The German soldiers who survived the incident carried their own complex responses. Several, including Hartmann and Richter, later described the experience as profoundly transforming, a moment when the clear lines between enemy and ally, threat and assistance, became impossibly blurred. In post-conflict interviews, multiple survivors mentioned Anna by name, describing her courage and compassion in terms that acknowledged how thoroughly she had defied their expectations. The incident raised questions that military analysts and historians would debate for decades. Had Anna's intervention represented a humanitarian act divorced from political context, or had it been a calculated decision to demonstrate civilian agency in circumstances that typically denied such agency? Had Hartmann's acceptance of her help shown pragmatic flexibility or dangerous naivety? More broadly, what did the incident suggest about the role of civilians in active conflict zones and the extent to which individuals could assert moral choice amid circumstances that seemed to preclude such choice? The answers remained elusive, precisely because the incident resisted simple categorization. Anna had not been a resistance fighter conducting sabotage, nor had she been a collaborator supporting occupying forces. She had been a farm girl who constructed a scarecrow to protect her potatoes, and who then made split-second moral decisions when that simple act coincidentally intersected with military operations occurring on her land. The ordinariness of her initial intentions made the extraordinary outcome even more striking. In the broader context of the Eastern European theatre during late 1944, the incident was microscopic, a tiny footnote amid massive operations involving millions of personnel. Yet it captured something essential about how conflicts are experienced by individuals caught in their path. Grand strategies and major battles dominate historical narratives, but the actual texture of military experience often consists of precisely these kinds of unexpected encounters, moments when human beings must improvise responses to situations no training or doctrine could have anticipated. The Scarecrow itself, that innocent catalyst for so much suffering and eventual mercy, disappeared sometime in early 1945. Whether it was destroyed by artillery fire, removed by advancing forces, or simply fell apart from weather exposure remains unknown. No photographs of it exist. Its appearance is known only through descriptions provided by Anna and various soldiers who saw it that October morning. In that sense, it became almost mythical, a symbol whose significance exceeded its physical reality. What can be verified through multiple documentary sources is the impact of its presence. 14 soldiers died because of tactical decisions made in response to its existence. 28 total casualties resulted from the chain of events it triggered. One young woman made a choice that saved additional lives and demonstrated that even in the most constrained circumstances, individual moral agency could manifest in powerful ways. An experienced German officer learned that the civilians his forces had dismissed as irrelevant might possess knowledge and capabilities that military intelligence entirely overlooked. The incident also highlighted how deeply the conflict had saturated every aspect of civilian life by late 1944. Hannah could not simply be a farmer growing potatoes. Her fields had become tactical terrain. Her scarecrow had become a potential military indicator. Her knowledge of her own property had become strategic intelligence. The boundary between civilian and military spheres had collapsed so completely that even the most ordinary actions carried potential military significance. For the German forces operating in the sector, the incident became a cautionary tale referenced in briefings and tactical discussions. Officers emphasized the need for comprehensive intelligence about minefield locations, better coordination with engineering units, and greater caution when operating in areas marked as civilian territory. The lessons were valuable, but came at a devastating price, paid by soldiers who had approached what seemed like a routine operation, with reasonable but ultimately insufficient caution. For Anna, the experience reinforced lessons she had already learned through months of living in a contested zone. That survival required constant alertness, that assumptions could prove fatal, that moral choices rarely came in simple forms. She had begun the incident believing she was protecting her potato crop from wildlife. She ended it, having demonstrated that compassion could coexist with pragmatism, that helping enemy soldiers did not require approving their cause, and that civilian resistance could take forms more complex than simple sabotage or collaboration. The story of Anna Kowalska's Scarecrow entered local memory as one of those inexplicable moments when ordinary life intersected with extraordinary circumstances. Parents in the region would eventually tell their children about the farm girl who saved enemy soldiers with a trick that was not really a trick at all, but rather an accidental convergence of agricultural practicality and military miscalculation. The tale carried lessons about unintended consequences, about the limits of military power, and about how individual acts of mercy could transcend political enmities. In the decades following the conflict, as historians worked to document the countless small incidents that collectively shaped larger outcomes, Anna's story emerged as particularly resonant. It offered a counterpoint to narratives of inevitable military logic and strategic determinism. It suggested that agency and choice could manifest even in the most constrained circumstances, that civilians were not merely passive victims, but active participants who could influence events in unexpected ways. The incident also served as a reminder of how thoroughly military planners could misread civilian landscapes. The German engineers who laid the mines had viewed Anna's farm as abandoned territory, suitable for defensive preparations without consideration of ongoing civilian presence. The reconnaissance unit had interpreted her Scarecrow as a potential military indicator rather than what it actually was, a farmer's practical response to agricultural pests. Both perspectives reflected how military frameworks could blind observers to simpler, more mundane realities. For modern readers examining the incident, its power lies precisely in its ordinariness. There were no dramatic battles, no heroic last stands, no clear victories or defeats. Instead, there was a young woman trying to grow potatoes, a group of soldiers conducting routine reconnaissance, and a series of tragic miscalculations that transformed both groups' expectations about who their enemies were and how mercy could manifest in circumstances that seemed to preclude it. These modest, human-scale events contained lessons that grand strategic narratives sometimes missed, and that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.